Let's take another look at my new favorite thing, the Knit and Purl tool, made by my friend Kathy Carter and her husband. This one is the fancy handle, which is a brand new thing. This one is the basic handle. My first video, we did this on a larger gauge loom. This is an F2 Kiss loom. And I think on the first video I showed it on multiple kinds of loom. But the F2 is a finer gauge, so let's look at how it works here. It's a very fine gauge. I'll get 6 stitches per inch. Here's a purl stitch. Up and replace the stitch. And here's a knit stitch. Now, in more detail, what's happening? On the purl, I'm bringing the working yarn to the front of the peg that's going to be knitted on, and below the original stitch, inserting the knit point that I'm tapping myself with into the stitch, rocking it a bit so the purl point comes through, and use that purl point to grab the strand of yarn that's new, lift it up, create a loop, and that's the new stitch, back onto the peg with it. Knitting. Wrap above the original stitch, use the knit point to lift. Knit stitch is done. Let's take a piece of white paper and look at this a little bit more closely. The one nearest to us, that's the knit point. It's a little bit longer and a little bit straighter. The one away from us is the purl point. It's more hook-shaped and it's a little bit shorter. Let's do a few more stitches. And then I want to show you some other things about this. One thing is I don't really have to twist anything much. I hold the tool at the same orientation all the time. In that case, did you see that I accidentally split this loosely hand-spun yarn, but I got it both strands to lay back on, and the stitch is fine. I pulled it snug and nobody will ever know. Let's see, ready to knit. And purl. Now this handle is a very normal size and shape of handle. I don't have any discomfort in using it. But the fancy handle is bigger around and longer, which of course gives you more leverage. If you have larger hands, you may like it better just because it's going to be more comfortably proportioned to your hands to hang on to. Let's do a little bit of work with the fancy handle. I'm going to hold my hand and the handle together. See, my hands are on the short side, but it takes up most of the length of my hand as compared to this one. So they're different, but they both feel good in use. This one, of course, is very lovely to behold. Okay, let me untangle my yarn. The tool portion that does the work is just the same on both of them. It feels different to use only in that you have to get used to where exactly do you hold the handle to get the correct approach. We're doing a purl stitch now. In, grab the new loop, bring it up. Being as how I'm right-handed, the position at which I have to hold it, the yarn that is, and work the tool is a little bit different working from right to left as it is left to right. Actually, my handedness has little to do with that. Whichever is your dominant hand, you will find that you use it differently going right versus going left. Because you're making a mirror image motion, and yet your hands and tools are not mirror images of one another the way you use them in this work, if that's not too obscure. There's a different angle for you to look at. The only thing I have found that you have to be really cautious about with this tool, since we have hooks on both sides, if you are careless about the one that is not being worked, you can snag the yarn. It's not difficult to avoid doing so, but I just need to mind this back hook while I'm using the front hook. In this case, I usually work with my knitting hook towards me and my purling hook away. It seems logical to me to do it that way. I'm not going to suggest there might not be other ways to do it, because I haven't tried everything in the world. But this works for me. So whichever hook you're not having your mind on, the one you're not using at this very moment, don't let it entangle itself. Suppose my backswing was too much here. I'd catch this yarn. Wouldn't want that. Now, here's what you really need to see. These little spots on looms can be quite challenging to get into. And because of the slenderness and the small movement needed, it's not so difficult. I just purled that stitch. It's one of the hardest stitches on the whole loom to get to. And I'm going to knit this one. Oops, I'm holding the tool wrong. Knit. Well, purl. And I can insert my tool from either side. So if it's more convenient to me to try to reach my purling yarn, oops, sorry about that. I'm reaching the purling yarn from the left of the stitch, but I brought it up on the right, just getting it to shift over. Let's start going back. And since I already showed you the large handled tool, the fancy handle, on these end stitches, this time we'll do it with the little tool. Well, let me be clear. The tool is not smaller. The handle is smaller. There's the knit. And here's the purl. Now, because this is only a sample, it doesn't matter if I knit these again. Let me go get my normal tool, one that I love, and show you the difference. This is a tool that Jack made for me, and we have a video on how you can make your own. It's one of my top favorite tools to use when I'm mostly doing knit stitches. And it will purl also, but if I wanted to purl it, I need to wrap this stitch for a purl, and normally I'd reach down there and grab my yarn and bring it up. I have to do it from the right here, because although I like doing it from the left, I just really haven't got very much room to insert my tool. So every time I get it in the stitch, it moves to the right. And that's okay. I can rotate it around and bring it up and successfully purl. But you can see that it's more awkward. And what you couldn't see is my hand is having to make a big motion to do that. Whereas the motion that I was making to do it here, let's not really make a stitch, but sketch out the motion. It's a rocking thing. It's much smaller, roughly a quarter to a third of the amount of action on the part of my wrist, hand, and knuckles. And because of that, working in the tight space is more realistic and easy to aim and get your stitch corrected. Let's go ahead and knit this next stitch over. But you know how I'm going to make the stitch, so I'm not going to so much focus on you seeing that as seeing my hand. And of course I can come from either side. Again, just twisting. Now if I come, we'll do the same stitch again going back. And even with this tool, a really good one, it seems like probably because of the size of my hook on this end, which is normally a very helpful thing, I was having to twist my hand considerably farther. I don't really mind that, but there are two reasons that you don't want to. One is the tight space. It's just not as easy to manage. And the other is thankfully a problem I don't suffer from, but if this motion gives you trouble, if you suffer from arthritis, for example, or just repetitive strain syndrome, certainly fibromyalgia, other inflammatory diseases, doing this over and over and over the bigger and the more you do it and the harder you have to work at it, the more stressful it is on the joint. That's actually one of the things I like about Kiss looms. In fact, I did suffer from repetitive strain syndrome. I actually earned it the old-fashioned way, overdoing all the time. And for some reason, changing to Kiss looms changed the list of things I was doing every day to excess enough that it went away. So at least for me, the somewhat less strenuous hooking over on a Kiss loom really made a difference. But back to the knit and purl tool. You're knitting and purling in the normal way, but you have a hook on each side of the same tool. They're a bit smaller than traditional loom hooks. Let me find my other one and we'll compare. So the motion is the same motion, but you have to keep it small for this one to do the job, and you have to keep it precise. But it is very precise, and it takes less motion of your hand to get it to do what it's doing, just because you're moving closer to the fulcrum is basically what it is in physics. And having the second tool means let's do a purl stitch with my regular hook. But I'll back off. I have to go through with the hook, just as with the knit purl tool, rotate, and bring it up. It's a bigger movement of my hand, and it's harder to aim the new stitch. Plus, if you're knitting and purling and you like to use a purling hook that's shaped like this, you drop this tool, you pick up a purling tool, and you do it. We've been doing it for years. It's not a disaster. But I must say that the knit purl tool is an improvement. It speeds you up. As you know, I'm not really that much of a fan of bragging about how fast the knitting goes, because I don't think we knit for speed in today's world. We knit for pleasure and for art. On the other hand, seeing progress does keep you encouraged and enthused, and you see faster progress. So it's a balancing act. What do we want from our knitting? I don't see any drawback to this kind of new tool with either handle, except what you always get with a new tool. You have to learn the exact motion that works for you. But I didn't have trouble mastering it. I think within 20 or 30 minutes, I was really getting comfortable and enjoying working with it. Well, let's back off and look at the tools side by side. There we go. This has the fattest handle. My hands are on the small side, and yet, well, I'll tell you an easy way to tell. Hands and feet tend to match, and I wear size 6.5 shoes. So they're not microscopic hands or feet, but they're on the small side, and I don't have any trouble fitting this in my hand. However, you can see there's room for a much larger hand to grip it if that person wanted to. And actually, I don't hold it in my fist as I just was. I hold it more like this, like a super pencil. And occasionally I do hold it like this. Depends where exactly I'm working. And let's compare these before I leave you and see how very much alike they are. Because of the thickness of the fancy handle, I can't get them stacked up perfectly. But you can see how much alike they are and how different they are from this other, more traditional approach to making knit and purl stitches.